It's Offsides, Mark, Ryan, and Diesel. We are the Fan Upstate. Fantastic to have you guys with us here on a Friday Eve edition of the show. Grateful to be with you guys, and always do appreciate our next guest. He runs, owns, and operates. I feel like, folks, there is a spot for one of these people for every big fan base. And you've got multiple people competing for it at every big fan base, and the market decides it. Capitalism decides who wins. On South Carolina, it's been Chris Phillips in the Spurs Up Show. One dude, he didn't start as a media member, built a really good and powerful media entity. For the Florida Gators, it used to be a site called Only Gators. Then that was sold, and now that position has been claimed by our next guest, Neil Schulman, who runs in all kinds of weather, and it's a fantastic, very opinionated Gator site. So why are we having Neil on today? Why would I agree to have Neil on, even though I'm a Gator fan, in an area that's Clemson first and South Carolina second? Because I think, folks, for the next 6 or 7 minutes, this is an overarching issue in college football where essentially, folks, you and me and everyone else are in danger of getting priced out of games. Some of you say, well, that has happened already, Mark. But Florida is discussing downsizing the Swamp from 90,000 people to 75,000 to make it more premium.
That's
and to make it more comfortable and premium. And what it's going to do is it's going to really hurt the home field advantage that Florida has. It's going to become much more of a wine and cheese crowd. Who makes more noise? The kids spending $20 for their ticket, or the gray top spending $2,000 for their ticket? Who makes more noise? In all kinds of weather, Neil Schulman joins us right now on the show. Neil, can you start us off with the 411 on what's actually going on here?
Well, right now, the University of Florida Athletics Association is looking for the architect that's going to orchestrate this project right now. They're more or less auditioning / interviewing different architects and different architectural firms to see which one of them is going to be the one to take their view and to move it forward into a stadium that we can all be proud of, and we can all say, oh, wow, that's a beautiful home field that we have. And I think that's a distinction right there that you and I have been cautioning some of our listeners, that there's a difference between a beautiful home field and an advantageous home field. And yes, people are going to point to the product. They're going to say, well, you shouldn't have lost those games to the teams you lost to. You know, you shouldn't have been in a dogfight with South Florida in the fourth quarter, regardless of how noisy your home field is. But the University of Florida is known for having a home football field that gives its team an advantage over the opponents. And by decreasing the capacity of the stadium by some 13, 14, 15 or so thousand fans, which, I mean, you asked for what's going on, they're looking at that. They're seriously considering taking out as many as 20,000 seats, and some of the more dramatic proposals called for even more. So that's something that I think is going to be detrimental to the Florida Gator football program, and that's, you know, as a fan, someone who covers a team and wants to see them do well, that's absolutely not what I want to see.
I'm totally with you, Neil. I'm totally with you. So is this just all about a further money grab? I mean, are they not getting enough from the SEC? What more could they possibly do with the money that they're going to take and lessen the home field advantage of the orange and blue?
Well, that's the issue. That's the problem. And like I've said, I told all my friends this when I said that I'm upset about this. Well, it's going to bring the university more money. Yeah, it will. From a business standpoint, it's a great move. You double the amount of luxury boxes. That's going to bring in a monsoon of money. And even with the general seating, by cutting out some 15,000 or so of them, I think, you know, you and I and Diesel and everyone else learned in econ class about what happens when you shrink the supply like that. The demand skyrockets. And then the UAA can get away with charging absolutely any ridiculous price it wants for seats that are now going for $80, $90. And to that point, I totally get it, because it's a business. You run a business with the Florida Gators, and businesses have to make money to survive. So, of course, that's going to be a factor, but it seems to be a little bit more than that, because Florida does fine. with its ticket sales. Yes, I understand the Eastern Washington game, which was moved because of a hurricane to a Sunday, only had 70,000 fans, which is really good for circumstances like that. And yes, I understand there were some empty seats scattered about for South Florida and Kentucky and South Carolina and Missouri, but there were more than 80,000 fans in the stadium. There were probably more than 85,000 in the stadium for each of those games. And if you're going to cut out all those seats, you're going to pit the fans against each other in a bidding war. And that's where it goes from the point of, well, is this because we're trying to run a business and do well as a business, to, okay, it kind of borders on greed right now. So that's the question that I've been asking, and honestly, I'd love some answers to.
Neil Schulman joining us here on the show. Neil, obviously you've seen the movie Jurassic Park. You know the scene where Jeff Goldblum's character says they were so busy wondering if they could, they never thought whether or not they should. Are there dissenting voices inside the Florida program who are trying to halt this and stop this and say, do you realize what you're doing? Do you realize that you're screwing over the average fan? Do you realize that now you are guaranteeing you'll never sell those tickets ever again and your attendance will continue to drop? Is there any dissenting voice with actual power and authority to stop this, or is it a foregone conclusion?
Well, it's a foregone conclusion that the Swamp needs to be more comfortable. And to that point, I definitely understand, because it is cramped and it is tight quarters. And I do understand the ADA compliance regulations and rules that the UAA is trying to be beholden to with these widening of the seats and the aisles. I mean, widening the aisles from 36 to 48 inches and widening the seats from 16.9 inches to 19 inches definitely is something that's going to improve the average fan comfort and bring the stadium up to code when it comes to the ADA law of 2010. But I think that whatever dissent and disagreement is there is about exactly how many seats we're going to take out. Moving or widening the seats, and I think even adding luxury boxes is a foregone conclusion. It's just a matter of to what extent does it change? How many luxury boxes are added? How much wider do the seats and the aisles become? I think that is the point of conversation. I think it's a point of conversation between the UAA collectively and the architectural firms it's interviewing right now, too.
Neil, now the question of widening the seats is an interesting thing to me, because my alma mater, Appalachian State, has increased our capacity for years by just removing the stickers off of the seats and moving them just a little bit closer. Had Florida done that in the past, to increase capacity, making things smaller and smaller, or is this is just a totally new thing for Florida, that they are actually creating comfort rather than removing the discomfort that they themselves created?
So I'm not totally up to speed on what the renovations were in the 1920s and 30s and World War II era times, but recently, no. Recently, the expanded capacity has come in the forms of tacking on new decks. They've added on just completely new physical structures that hold more seats in the end zone. They've added a skybox, they've added a press box, they've added more luxury boxes there. That's been the real only renovations they've made since the Swamp was really created. I mean, Florida Field hasn't really been touched, or the stadium that surrounds Florida Field hasn't really been touched for a couple of decades. I mean, the early 2000s was the last time they really did anything to it. Throughout the Spurrier years, they didn't really touch it, and I think it was just a couple of additional sections on top of the end zone seats. So Florida hasn't really had a lot of experience of narrowing things down. I think it's just always been narrow, cramped quarters for the better part of the last 75, 80 years or so.
Neil Schulman joining us here on the show. Neil, I got a surprise when I moved here 4.5 years ago. And I go to Clemson games frequently. I cover the Clemson Tigers here. And every once in a while, I will ask the bootleggers outside the stadium selling tickets, what are you looking for? And this is what jumped out to me, Neil. Okay? Now, Clemson, the town of Clemson, doesn't have a huge population. It's difficult to get into and get out of. We heard all of the stories about college football attendance declining, 7 or 8 years in a row. What surprised me, Neil, is that if it's not like Clemson versus Texas A&M, which came in 2019, or Clemson versus Notre Dame, most of these games you can get a walk-in ticket from a bootlegger selling them for between $20 and $50. Okay, Clemson Boston College, $20. Clemson versus Georgia Tech, $30. Can you put into? I don't think anyone here understands trying to get into a Florida game. You know, like if you're getting a bootleg ticket on the outside of the stadium, Neil, what does that cost for you to get a regular ticket? Let's say you want a ticket to see Florida against Mississippi State at the Swamp. What can you expect to pay for that ticket?
Well, I think if you're looking at an opponent like Mississippi State, you're probably on the street. You're probably looking right around face value, and if not a little bit less than that. People might get a little bit more desperate as kickoff time approaches, and after the game starts, they plummet. But for a game like Mississippi State, I mean, those tickets typically sell. I mean, Florida hasn't played Mississippi State at home since 2010, but I'll use Missouri as a better example. That's probably a comparable opponent. So for Missouri last year, tickets on the 50 were going for about 65, 70 or so. Of course, the kickoff time had a lot to do with that. A noon kick in October in Florida, people didn't want to do it. Of course, other people did, but a lot of the people who were in my section for that game said, yeah, we just bought tickets last minute, and they cost between, I think the low was 55 and the high was like 80 or so. So really not terrible for the good seats for opponents like that. Of course, you start talking about FSU or even Tennessee, and that number will double. But it's not too bad right now with the capacity being 88,500.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, you try to get tickets online. They're over $100 for Florida games. People don't realize how good they have it here. And the moral of the story is, right now, people are being priced out of this. Neil, where can we go? Where can our listeners go? Because, look, you might think, well, I'm glad this doesn't involve us. It will, and it could. Do not sign up for this. Do not sign on to being priced out of your team's games. Where can people take part, Neil?
So it's on change.org. I put it there because I figured that would attract a more national audience for the reason that you just brought up, because it doesn't affect you today, but it very well might tomorrow. Your team might be the next one where the AD decides, yeah, let's just double or triple the amount of luxury boxes. So it's on change.org. If you go to our Twitter, if you go to our Facebook, Twitter is at allkindsweather. You will see it as our pinned tweet. It is at the very top of our Twitter timeline. Facebook, it is the second and third most recent post there, so you'll be able to find it there as well. You can find all our content at inallkindsofweather.com. Working on a new banner image. It actually just came down because the link to it got broken. So we're going to put that back up very shortly. It'll be a banner on our website in allkindsofweather.com, a link to that petition for y'all to go and sign.
Neil Schulman in All Kinds of Weather. Great cause, Neil. I stand with you, my brother. I stand with you. Keep up the good fight, all right?
Sounds good. Will do. Thank you. And look forward to talking some more football with you soon.
All right. Take care. Neil Schulman in All Kinds of Weather. Don't laugh, folks. I mean, look, I'm not trying to grandstand for Florida here. I'm not trying to do anything self-serving. This is where college football is going.